Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Service Impact Podcast. And today we are talking about Google's SERPs and some of the changes that have taken place here recently within Google Search Console and how that might be throwing some people for a loop. And here to discuss the issues or what's happening is Stacey Abler. She's from the mothership at Outside Communications. How are you today, Stacey?
I'm doing good. How are you, Lance?
I'm doing awesome. So more changes. It seems like that is the theme of 2025. Tons and tons of changes from Google. This time it's impacting Google Search Console, but why should anybody care?
Yeah, so there's definitely lots of changes that are happening. I think this is one that really caught everyone off guard. And so when you and I go to search and we do a search on Google, then we typically see 10 results when we do that search. And if we want to see the next set of results, then we need to click to the next page or to load more, whatever it happens to be. So there are lots of SEO trackers and then bots in general that can go out and also pull search results. And when they do it, they basically figured out a trick so that they could pull 100 results all at one time. So when they're pulling the data in for Search Console, it's looking at the number of impressions that your website gets, the number of clicks that it gets, your click-through rate, and then your positioning of your keywords. So when you and I go and it just shows 10 results, then the only way that we would get an impression for that is with our website is in the top 10. But with the way that these crawlers were going in and these SEO tools were going in and able to show 100 results that appeared theoretically on the first page, then if your website was anywhere in that top 100, it would get an impression. So obviously, just in general, it's not a true impression because it's not true human traffic that is seeing that. But that data is completely skewed because in reality, when a human is there, if your website is sitting at, position 76, then the likelihood that it would ever get an impression is not great because most people don't go beyond the first page of Google and at most the second page. So this data that was coming in was really skewing everything because it was making the impressions look like they were much larger than they actually were. There were a lot of people who were confused about how come my impressions are growing so much and my clicks are not. And so that was also causing some issues with that. But in mid-September, Google went in and shut that feature off that they were using to get around that to be able to show 100 results at a time. So overnight, most website owners in Google's Search Console saw their impressions drop dramatically in some cases, and the number of queries that they have or the number of keywords that they're showing up for also decreased. At the same time, they saw an increase in your overall keyword rank because now it's only looking at the keywords that are showing up on that first page in general and ranking that because it's focused more on what human traffic would be. And so, where before you would have an average where your position 84 page is now getting averaged in with your position 2 page. Now you have a lower number of positions that it's looking at to do that average, if that makes sense. It can get confusing. I almost need like a little diagram to sit here and draw everything out. But in general, for a website owner, when you go into Google Search Console now, you're going to see a drop in impressions. Your clicks should remain relatively stable. Click-through rate will be increased in some cases. And then your number of keywords will have dropped, but your rank will have increased or it will be better than what it was previously. So just need to, be aware of that when you're going in and looking at your data so that you don't make the wrong decision based on, a big drop and kind of change the entire strategy. Because in reality, nothing has changed. Your website positioning hasn't changed. The number of keywords you're showing for hasn't changed. It's simply the way that it's being reported, and you just don't have all 100 results being kind of counted as if they're in the top 10.
Seems like a change that's, I mean, doesn't it make sense? I mean, this doesn't seem like something that's, it's like we're not really losing anything. It doesn't feel like, it feels like something that probably should have been done a long time ago. Nobody cares about position rank 86 or position rank 56. I mean, it's like if you're not on the front page, if you're not in the game per se, you're not doing any good anyway. Now, granted, for SEOs and for companies that are trying to track progress, I guess I guess some of this information is being cut off at the knees a little bit. And I guess how are companies like ourselves going to connect the dots? In other words, you mentioned year over year rank, but now we're not comparing apples to apples anymore. Like, how are we going to be able to still understand efficacy and whether or not we're moving in the right direction on the account?
Right. So, I mean, I think there's the big impacts from the website owner's perspective is realizing that you don't have to go in and completely do a 180 on whatever strategy that you're using for SEO. And then also the realization that doing any sort of month over month, year over year, quarter over quarter comparisons for how your website is performing from an organic search perspective as far as what's happening in search. So how many impressions you're getting, how many keywords are showing up, all that has now become essentially impossible to be able to do, at least on the data that they're giving us at this moment. So before they went or did away with that particular parameter they were using to kind of game the system, so to speak, all that data is still there. So, without Google going backwards and cleaning up the data that we have previously, then we don't have any way to know how much of that data was from this or, is true impressions, clicks, click-through rate, all of that on the data that we do have. So going forward, what we are going to be doing is obviously trying to figure out a way around the huge SEO, companies and trackers, as far as like the software programs that are out there are also trying to determine how they're going to do this, because for them, instead of making, one API call to Google and getting 100 results, now if they want to get those same 100 results, they have to make 10 API calls, which is obviously much more expensive and time and resource intensive. So they're trying to determine what they're going to do to be able to still provide the service that they've been providing and to provide the information. I think for us at Outside Communications, what we're going to focus on is a lot of what we've always been focusing on, and that is what happens on your actual website. So this doesn't change the amount of traffic that comes into your website, how we've been able to track that, and then, of course, what happens once they get to your site. So to a certain extent, the Google Search Console data and what was happening in search from an impression standpoint, so how many times that your website showed up when someone searched for a particular keyword, is helpful to be able to look at how different tactics that we're doing are performing. Are we improving, those sorts of things? But ultimately, the thing that really matters is what's happening on your site. So how much traffic do we have to your site that's coming from organic search? And then how many conversions are we getting from that traffic that is coming into the site? So that's where we'll laser focus on that, because we really can't trust the other data that is out there right now for what's happening in search alone, regardless of whether or not they click on your website.
Form fills and phone calls. And that's what makes the world go round for service businesses. And I think that's a great point. Those sort of metrics don't lie, and they don't change really. In other words, with the wind. In other words, how many phone calls you're getting, how many form fills you're seeing is really, at the end of the day, all that matters. But I think we'd call 2025 the year of change for Google. I can't remember a time in the years in the 25 years I've been tracking Google. I can't remember a time where it was the SERPs, the new products, the changes were this volatile. I mean, can you remember a year where there was this much happening? It's been a crazy year.
Yes, it has been. I think Google's always had a lot of, changes that have happened with algorithm updates. There were, always the big ones that people would hear about. But, in reality, Google's changing how search works on pretty much a continual basis. They just didn't all hit the radar screen. But, in the past, and we're going to make some broad generalizations, but a lot of the algorithm changes were to make search better. So it was, in theory anyway. So the sites that would get penalized a lot of times were sites that were doing things that were, maybe a little under the table. I wouldn't go so far as say black hat with everything, but maybe gray, and some of the tactics that were being used. In more recent years, then some of the sites that were doing everything as they should be started getting hit. And then this year, especially, or the past 18 months or so with AI coming into play, then that's when we started seeing most websites get hit pretty much across the board. Some industries were a little more impacted than others from having the AI overviews there that were stealing traffic, so to speak, and resulting in that zero-click search. But I think, this has definitely been a lot of changes that have occurred. Even on like the Google Ads side, there's been a lot of new products that have been introduced. They've worked AI into that as well, where, they wanted to kind of work behind the scenes with everything. So I think there have definitely been a lot of changes, and it's a lot to stay on top of so that you know how to address each thing that's coming and which things need a new strategy and which things like this are a difference in the data that you get, but the underlying metrics that actually matter have not shifted.
All right, so we're going to stay on top of it like we always have. And if this is your first time listening to the Service Impact Podcast, like, subscribe, and stay with us. We're going to continue to update this podcast and ones like it, where we topically continue to stay with the changes that are hitting marketing for service companies, and it's a lot of them. But Stacey, thanks for coming in. Thanks for shedding some light on this, and look forward to future conversations on this subject.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Service Impact Podcast. We'll see you next time.